What's still happening, Dominic says. All right, let's get serious now. I want to talk to you about something serious because this is the season of gift giving, my friends. It's an interesting phenomena, is it not? We spend many hours, sometimes stressful, painful hours, trying to figure out what to give others, hoping to get it just right. And sometimes we come out of the holidays feeling successful. We got everything on our list covered, sent our holiday cards out on time. And sometimes we are left feeling not so successful, thinking that we missed appreciating everyone in our lives, or that our gifts missed the mark, or were sent back. Thank you, Abby. Or that we once again failed to send a card to that distant relative or friend, the one that you always get a card from them. Do you have one of those folks? Yeah. Well, I mostly fall into that second category and will admit that the joy of gift giving that I have is also often accompanied by that little bit of pain and stress of feeling that I didn't quite do it well enough. It's an interesting pressure we put on ourselves. Where did this tradition all begin, you may ask? Of course, some Christians see this gift giving as symbolic of the story of the three wise men and their gifts to Jesus. But gift giving at this time of year dates way further back into the Europe and Middle East in the pagan times during December and early January. These festivities, which would include food and drink and music and lights and gift giving, and are still going on today. These holidays, this gift giving was always meant to help ease the pain of this darkness of this time, this winter solstice, this Yule time. Unfortunately, however, as many of you know, the Christian leaders did their best to push the holidays around a little bit. They considered it their duty to try to override some of these pagan rituals. And in the 4th century, they created their own festival to celebrate the birth of Jesus. And we know this festival as Christmas. It's worth noting that the Bible actually never says explicitly when Jesus was born, and most scholars and theologians believe it was actually in the spring, but that's for another sermon. Interestingly, some Christians at the time, way back then, actually refused to even celebrate Christmas, and it was actually illegal in America until the 1680s. I thought that was interesting. At first, of course, Christmas was about giving simple homemade gifts. But then in the early 1800s, thanks to the popularity of things like The Night Before Christmas and the novella Christmas Carol and all those images of this jolly old man with a great laugh giving lots of presents, well, the holiday started to become more consumerized and secularized. It's interesting to note that it wasn't even a common practice for Hanukkah for gifts to be given until really the early 1900s, when parents were encouraged by corporations to not let their children miss out on gifts like their Christian peers were getting. Anyway, so that's all history now. So here we are. Here we are surrounded by wrapping paper and ribbons and, oh, who used up the last of the tape, right? There's always never quite enough tape. But our anthem and consumerism and the dubious start of Christmas all set aside, this can be a season to remind ourselves of some of the greatest gifts we can give. And that's what I want to do this morning. Gifts that require neither cash nor the internet, nor wrappings or ribbons or tape. I'm going to share a few stories with you this morning, and you can see if you can guess which of these greatest gifts I'm referring to. The first story I want to share comes from the Indian leader Mahatma Gandhi. The story goes that one day he was getting on a train and his sandal slipped off and fell to the ground. The train was moving and there was no time to get it back, but without hesitation, Gandhi did this beautiful thing. He took off his second sandal and he threw it over towards where the first lay on the ground. Asked by his colleague why he did that, he said, "One sandal wouldn't do anyone any good, but two would certainly help someone." By throwing that sandal, Gandhi showed an important insight. He knew what others needed, and he knew what he needed to let go of. When I first read that story, I wondered, would I have done the same thing? Would I have had that place of mind in that moment to quickly be so selfless? I'd like to think so, but truthfully, I have to admit that despite my best efforts, I often fall short. Our second story is a lesson offered to me one day by a homeless man in New York City. I was in my early 20s and had just spent 5 days in seclusion in a personal retreat. Afterward, I was scheduled to visit a friend in New York City, and when I arrived, I remember feeling so disoriented, so many noises and things going on in the city, and I remember just walking through the streets of New York. My meditation and seclusion time had made me sensitive, or so I thought, and I walked around feeling this heavy weight of what I felt like was the despair and the pain that lived amongst all the poverty that I was passing by. One person who was hanging out on the street went so far as to tell me to smile, saying that whatever it was that was making me sad couldn't be that bad. But I continued to walk, feeling despair. On the second day, I let my friend know that I didn't really feel like doing much socially, but instead I wanted to cook up food and take it to the homeless. At the time, I was eating mostly brown rice and beans and a few veggies. So as I started cooking, I started getting a little self-conscious, thinking maybe the folks I was cooking for wouldn't be interested in this health food. That's what we called it at the time. But I packed it up in about 10 different lunch-sized bags nonetheless, and I headed to the park. I quickly spotted some men hanging out, and they looked like they might be in need of support, and so I cautiously approached one of them. Taking a bag from my backpack, I showed it to him, and I said, "I made you some food if you'd like it." The man, with ruffled hair and less than a full set of teeth, smiled largely and said, "Yeah, sure." As he started to take the bag from me, I got really self-conscious about what I had made. "You may not like it," I said. It's health food." And then he did an interesting thing. He stopped. And it's as if he was noticing my discomfort. And he seemed to shift his focus on what I needed. And then this older man looked at this young girl that I was, and he looked at her with great compassion. And his smile got bigger, and he chuckled, and he said, "Sweetie, when you are hungry, everything is health food." I smiled, feeling both loved by him, but also truly humbled. Here I was thinking I was giving something to him, but in his reply, he gave something to me. He showed me compassion, and in doing so, he helped me see how much of my focus had been on what he lacked, not on his humanity. I had been focusing on a perceived lack that surrounded me as I walked around feeling pity for the people I saw. And I had been so worried about how my food would be accepted that I almost failed to see the real human that was graciously receiving it. But he was there, a real human, living his life, and sure, he had life challenges that I did not face, but it was his life. And I could see in that moment that he also experienced love and joy and compassion, not just despair and need. Until that moment, I hadn't seen all that. I had only seen the pain I imagined he and the person on the street the day before were going through. It's like I was trying to fix some part of them in my giving. And to be sure, the food was needed, and I'm sure appreciated, but my pity and my view of them as somehow broken, I don't think that was what was needed. During the December holidays, many of us give money and items to those in need, and I think that is a beautiful thing, and I am sure it is much appreciated. And as we do that giving, we also must be aware of how we view those we are hoping to help. Sometimes in our desire to help others, I think we fail to see the fullness of those we are helping. I know I did that day in the park. And remembering that man all these years later helps me remember that no one in need is only a person in need. No one is needing to be fixed. Seeing each other as broken is something we do all too often to even those closest to us. We focus on what we perceive as lacking, as wrong, as in need of change. Anybody guilty of looking at your children or your spouse or parents or colleagues or loved ones or, hey, maybe even your minister, and making a mental list of all the things that should be better? I'm assuming everyone's got their hand raised, right? Sometimes our mental lists go so far as to fall out of our mouths, and we become walking, talking punch lists. You know what those are? I know Michael does. If you're in construction, a punch list is that list of all the things that need to be fixed. You got to just punch it out. Author Liz Gilbert says one of the oldest and most generous tricks that the universe plays on human beings is to bury strange jewels within us and then stand back and see if we can find them. I would add to her comment that one of the greatest opportunities we have in the universe is to look for and find and point out with words and actions the jewels within each other that we recognize. The next story I will share comes from the Buddhist teacher Tara Brach. She says, I remember one man who was in our teacher training out at Spirit Rock. He described his childhood and his growing up years. They were really tough. She adds, Vinny was a tough guy. He's a kind of punk-looking guy. Grew up with a chip on his shoulder. But when I met him, I noticed his eyes. He had these green eyes with thick glasses, very sad and beautiful eyes. And then Tara recounts his story. She says he ended up being put in jail in his younger years. So he came out then later as an ex-convict. And he ran around with gangs in Connecticut. And at one point, he and his gang were beating up a homeless guy. And the guy begins pleading to Vinny to help him. And Vinny and the guy lock eyes for a moment. And this guy looks deeply at Vinny and says, "You've got more compassion in your eyes than anyone I've ever met." And this really hit Vinny. It hit him so hard that he couldn't keep beating this guy up. And he tells his gang members, this guy's not worth it, let's go. And so they leave. But that experience stayed with Vinny. And he continued to hear those words in his head over and over. And he says it changed him. And in fact, it changed his life. Because soon after, Vinny decided to start working with disadvantaged youth. And he got trained. And now he works with youth and those that are disadvantaged and those that are most at risk. And he teaches them mindfulness and other strategies for balance and clarity. And he says he's unable now to look at even the most angry or violent teen and not see who that person really is. There's an amazing gift we offer another when we can see past all their outer stuff and see who is really there. I'm sure many of you have had that person in your life, the one who believed in you when others did not. Think of them now. Think of that one. Maybe it was a teacher or a coach or a friend, somebody who really saw you, who really knew that your life, no matter what was happening on the outside, was worthy and good. They saw the sparkle in your eye. Those are the people we remember, and those are the gifts that are most precious to us. In our stillness theme material from Soul Matters this month, there was a suggestion to do a practice. And this practice was this, to simply sit still with a loved one in view somewhere and to just watch them, just to gaze at them. We watch our loved ones all the time throughout the day, but the question is, do we really see them? Or is our watching just accompanied by commentary or the thoughts of the to-do list you were hoping that they would to-do? So this practice is so simple. It's just be present with another person. And I invite you to just do a little bit of it now, if there's someone in your house, to just gaze over at them and just start to see them. You'll know you're really seeing somebody because you can't help but tear up a little, to feel astonished by them, to be fascinated by them, to be in awe of this live human being. It's like watching a newborn baby. Have you ever done that? Just held a newborn baby. They're so mesmerizing. I think part of that is because they don't come with that backlog of our thoughts about them. When we see them, we're just seeing their pure spirit, not all the interpretations we have about them. The final story comes from Rachel Naomi Riemann, a writer, physician, teacher, and she describes the effect that her grandfather had on her and a curious twist in her relationship with her mother. She says that when her grandfather died, she was 7 years old, and she had never lived in the world without him before, and it was hard. It was hard because, she says, he looked at me as no one else had and called me a special name, Nshumala, which means little beloved soul. When he died, she said, there was no one left to call me that anymore. She says, at first I was afraid that without him to see me and to tell God who I was, I might disappear. But slowly over time, I came to understand that in some mysterious way, I had learned to see myself through his eyes. That once blessed, we are blessed forever. And then she goes on. She says, many years later, when in her extreme old age, my mother began to light candles and talk to God herself. It was at that time that I told her about the blessings that grandfather gave me and what they had meant to me. And then my mother smiled sadly, and she said, I blessed you every day of your life, Rachel. I just never had the wisdom to do it out loud. I hope all of these stories today remind you that the greatest gift of the holidays, or any day, is to recognize each other, to see each other in all of our humanness as whole, as beautiful, as sacred, as beings filled with worth and dignity. And then, perhaps most importantly, to let each other know what you see. The greatest gift is to be the one about who another will one day say, yes, because they saw my beauty, they saw my humanity, my compassion, my heart. I am a different person. This holiday, may you come in from amongst all the wrappings and the beautiful packages and come in from the eggnog and the cookies and really give the greatest gift to everyone you encounter. You are beautiful just the way you are. I see you and I honor you. I'm going to invite us to end our service this morning by singing one of my favorite songs, Kumbaya. Because I love this one. This phrase, Kumbaya, means come by here. Often sung as a call to God to be present with us. I like to think of it as a welcoming of the holy in everything that we do. So please come by here, rise in body or spirit as you are able,